welcome to another magical Saturday stream. I am, of course, your host, JoeMagician, and last week we talked a bit about a particular member of House Strong and his exploits and how he seemed to get involved with the dragons and he ended up getting punished for it, and it was like almost like divine retribution. That is, of course, Harwin Strong during the Dance of the Dragons. There's another member of House Strong that did almost the same thing, except things to apparently have worked out way better for her. And that is, of course, the Enigma, the Witch Queen of Harrenhal, Alys Rivers. A fan favorite from Fire and Blood, to say the least. So yeah, we're going to talk all about Alys Rivers, her backstory, where she'll fit into House of the Dragon. Is she really magical? What happened to her at the end of Fire and Blood? Where is she maybe around today? And all sorts of other stuff. There's a lot of good stuff to really get onto there with Alys Rivers. Very intriguing character. One that I imagine George had a lot of fun writing. It seems like he just kind of went wild with her. Before we get to that, a few things that came out. Obviously, Chapter 2, I talked about this last week, of the Dying of the Light read-through, is available on my Patreon. It was done with Aziz of History of Westeros. Chapter 2 is free for anybody. Anybody can go listen to it. The rest of them are behind. The rest of them you have to be a patron for, but you can. Let me just drop that link in the chat. I'll put it in the description too. Just a preview of the series, what Dying of the Light is like. Me and Aziz just having a real good time. There's stuff about the Thousand Worlds, George's sci-fi universe. There's a lot of connections to A Song of Ice and Fire. Mysteries of why Dirk Talarion's on Warlorn. Rhaegar makes a surprising introduction into the story, along with Varys and Viserys and Theon, maybe Tormund. It's really fascinating seeing how he writes these old stories and how they have carried through to the ones that we know and love. So if you want to check that out, link there in the chat. I'll put it in the description too. And Chapter 3 will be coming out as soon as the stream ends. They're going to be more spaced out in the future so that one will come out halfway through the month and the other half will come out at the end of the month. Next month, of course, will be with Maester Mary of the Learned Hands podcast. She's making her reappearance on the Joe Magician content stuff, I guess. I guess that's what you would call it. She's a big fan of Dying of the Light and George's old work, so we're going to be doing chapters 4 and 5 for August. So look forward to those things. For chapter 3, what's going on there? Well, we get the history of High Kevlar. We get a lot about Jon, Vickery, High Ironjade, the Sinister Braiths, Arkin the Choker, and kind of exactly how close Dirk has been to death so far. Spoiler alert, a lot closer than he thinks. And also, George reveals his hand in a very unusual way and tells us the truth behind his fictional myths and legends, which obviously gets Aziz and I all worked up in excitement. So if that sounds intriguing to you, head on over to my Patreon. Chapter 2 as a free sample for you guys, so go ahead and check that out. And for today's stream, what are we doing today? So 100, slam that like button if you could. Leave comments and all the other things. Share it around. These all help with trying to navigate the extremely hungry and unpredictable YouTube algorithm. So if you guys slam the likes up to 150, which I hope you will, I'll put on my Gurmy hat. 200 likes, we'll put on the big old wizard hat sitting behind me for the rest of the stream. And as for what should you put in the comments? What should be in the comments? Yes, here's a good one. Who is the best member of House Strong, and why is it all of them? Basically, just talk about House Strong. That's what I would appreciate, because this is secretly, even though it's Alys Rivers, a House Strong stream. I am keeping the House Strong train going. I might just do this for a few weeks, and we just roll through House Strong's role in Dance of the Dragons. Maybe circle around to Lucamora another time, that kind of thing. Yeah, House Strong stream. Woo! What about A Song for Leah? I have read A Song for Leah. That's a pretty short story, though. Maybe in the future, maybe some analysis on it or something like that. I actually got so excited reading through Dying of the Light and seeing kind of Baby George in action and how that book connects to his later books that I went ahead and I ordered earlier this week a whole bunch of the rest of his short story collections, his other books, like Armageddon Rag, Hunter's Run, which he wrote with Gardner Dozois and Daniel Abraham, the co-author of The Expanse. Windhaven, which he wrote with Lisa Tuttle, who features in Dying of the Light. Wink, wink, wink. Along with some other stuff. So, oh, Duncan, haven't I already done streams on Duncan Tuttle? I think I've done like 2 on him at this point. So I think we'll wait before Dunk comes back up, unless I make a video about him, which might end up happening. Yeah, I thought we would start here with an opening quote about Alys. I feel like this one really sets the scene for her, and I think is meant to tantalize the reader as George plans to release Fire and Blood Volume 2 at some point. Who knows when that's going to be. The order of what he's currently writing tends to change a lot. But this is towards the end of her story and the end of Fire and Blood, and it's a fascinating one, and I really... This is the kind of thing that I think A Song of Ice and Fire nerds get really excited about. So, quote here is, Vhagar, older and much the larger, was also slower, made ponderous by her very size, and ascended more gradually in ever-widening circles that took her and her rider out over the waters of the God's Eye. The hour was late, the sun was close to setting, and the lake was calm, its surface glimmering like a sheet of beaten copper. Up and up she soared, searching for Caraxes, not Karapskis. I'll make Sandrick's very upset. As Alys Rivers watched from atop the King's Pyre Tower in Harrenhal below. A lot of interesting stuff that's going on there. Alys on top of the King's Pyre Tower, watching the dragons dance. Her hair streaming behind her, with pregnant with Aemon's child. A lot of stuff going on there. A lot of interesting things. Kind of thing that makes you excited about a character. At least it does for me. And it kind of came out of nowhere. But yeah, let's talk about where Alys Rivers kind of came out of nowhere. Because she does. She does come out really out of nowhere in Fire and Blood. And she's actually not present for roughly half of the Dance of the Dragons. Not present, and then all of a sudden is very present. Is all over the place. So Alys Rivers starts off the story as a member of the House Strong household at Harrenhal. And she is not a peasant, but a lord's daughter somewhere along the line. Now, why is that? Well, because she holds the name Rivers. A misconception, I think, among fans is that bastard names are given to any bastard in Westeros, but that is incorrect. A child needs to have an acknowledged noble parent for them to be quote-unquote worthy of a bastard name. Like, for instance, Duncan the Tall is not Duncan Waters, like he should be if he was a bastard child from the Crown Lands. Peasants didn't really get last names. They would often use, for example, their father's name as their last name. A tradition that persists even in the real world to the present day, although not exactly. So names like Robertson and Anderson are examples of this. They mean son of Robert, son of Anders, that kind of thing. It's also carried over from Viking culture. They do that kind of thing. So Larson is son of Lars. All those sorts of names. That's basically what they mean, and that's what essentially what happens to peasants in A Song of Ice and Fire. But that's not Alys Rivers. Alys has a bastard name. She is an acknowledged child of some noble. Why we don't know? Well, we're going to get to that. The first thing we learn about Alys is that she is an enigma, a character that, despite being a Rivers, has very, very uncertain lineage. The Watsonian reason is that House Strong went extinct relatively quickly after her appearance in the story. Very curious how that happened. And we're not a particularly powerful historical house with an important cultural center around them where such histories are recorded. And almost all the household died out as well. So if you're thinking about in-universe, who would be the one writing the story about where Alys Rivers comes from? Well, there's not a lot of people left. So They only have very limited information about Alys Rivers, whereas if How Strong had continued and they had not all been killed by Aemon One-Eye, spoiler alert, then it's quite possible we would know exactly who her parents were. But the Doyleist perspective is, why does George do this? Because he wants you, the reader, to look at her with an eye of suspicion, an eye of mystery, that there's something strange about her, that she's shrouded in the past. There's things you don't know about her, and maybe there's a tinge of the supernatural around her. That there's something different about Alys Rivers, something to pay attention to. So when you see that kind of stuff from George, you should go like, oh, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and really reread these things quite a lot, because there's a reason for the mystery being introduced. So with that in mind, what do we know about Alys Rivers? The answer is not much. There's conflicting accounts of who she even is in Fire and Blood. She's described as a dark-haired beauty at around 40 years old, but she also has kind of this ageless appearance to her. Very often she's described as being much older than her appearance lets on, which is a little strange. According to one history, she's the bastard daughter of the previously mentioned Lord Lionel Strong, who, according to the story, in his youth had an affair with a member of the Harrenhal household, and there you get Alys Rivers. And this seems to track as maybe a possibility. Lionel is known to have 4 children with his 3 wives. Lords, unfortunately, often take advantage of their position of being basically absolute rulers in their domain and sleep with the help and the people and the peasants around them. And as we know with the Strongs, being deserving of horny jail and a good bonking is basically a genetic trait. So that would seem to track. Interesting note, that would make her sister to both Harwin and Larys Strong, as well as their 2 sisters. But another account is very different, and this is that she's maybe Lionel's sister, or perhaps even older than that. Now the story goes that Alys Rivers was a prodigious wet nurse for House Strong at Harrenhal, that basically every baby born in the castle was nursed by Alys over the years. And instead of being the sister to Harwin and Larys, that she was instead their aunts, or like half aunts or something like that. But then it goes even further, that maybe Alys was the wet nurse to Lionel Strong, that maybe she's even older than the Lord himself. And this is where it kind of starts getting into old Nan territory. This is the sort of thing we hear about her up in Winterfell, where everyone's like, I don't really know where she came from. Nobody's sure which lords she even served, which ones she nursed, that kind of thing. It's the same thing here with Alys. Again, with the idea that there's a real mystery about her upbringing and which side of the family she comes from. Again, George is saying, like, look, she's like a little bit like old Nan. So that's another connection to like the old gods, to kind of legend and magic, that kind of stuff. These things being sprinkled in. But that would be like impossible, right? If she was actually the wet nurse to Lionel Strong, that would put her somewhere in her 60s or even older. And that's kind of where we start getting the talk of the witchiness and the dark magic nature of Alys Rivers. Munkin and Eustace in Fire and Blood both insist that Alys Rivers was an enchantress, a woods witch, a practitioner of the dark arts. We got a great quote here from Fire and Blood that kind of just sets this up. Who was this woman? A serving wench who dabbled in poison and spells, says Munkin. A woods witch, claimed Septon Eustace. A malign enchantress who bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth. Mushroom would have us believe. Now, if that sounds familiar, it really, really should. This is not the first time in A Song of Ice and Fire we have heard about these kind of things. This is the exact same stories we get about Mad Danelle Lothston. Decades later, when she did her whole bloody Countess of Harrenhal thing. that she was said to send out bats to capture the young and the virgins to bathe in their blood to remain young. And this is a relatively common tale that we are told about powerful and sometimes magical women within Westeros. For instance, Daenerys is rumored to do this by the Yunkai. It's referenced as an insult against her, and she actually brings it up a few times as like a dark joke. She's like, oh, I gotta get ready for battle. We better bathe me in blood to get ready for it, that kind of thing. We also hear this about Shiar Seastar, Rohane Weber, are all rumored to be one of these dark witch characters that bathe in blood, which is not to say that it never happened. Like, that nobody ever tried to bathe in blood to make themselves young. That's like a thing that happened in the real. You guys in the chat are talking about it. Yes, there was a real bloody countess that supposedly did this. So that's what George is drawing on, but he also applied the story to a lot of different characters across a lot of different time frames, which tells you that it's not just a weird story about one person, that this is kind of a cultural thing, that witches and magical women, for some reason, are really involved with like blood magic and trying to stay young. Or at least that's the perception. And considering that Valyrians believe that all magic is rooted in blood and fire, then, you know, maybe it's not that far off. The idea that if somebody is magical, they are involved with blood magic. Yeah, that seems kind of right. Especially with the old gods. They were well known to have sacrifices, human sacrifices to them. So that may be where it's coming from. But the only person that we know in A Song of Ice and Fire that is called a witch, and probably is close to it by any measure of her magic use, is Melisandre. Melisandre, they call her the Red Witch. She does legitimately have magic powers. Oh yeah, this is also like a form of blood libel, which is not a thing we're going to get into, but it is a thing you can Google in your own time. The connections to Melisandre, though, is very interesting because Melisandre is a character who is far older than she appears, though she uses a glamour, the ruby around her neck, basically allows her to appear much more young and beautiful than she really is. That was revealed in Game of Thrones, but it's been widely speculated in the fandom that this is probably true, that Melisandre is far, far, far older than she appears. So the question is about Alys Rivers. Is she like Melisandre? If she's as old as Mushroom claims, maybe she's wearing a magical disguise. Maybe she's wearing a glamour. And this is something that's hinted at perhaps a little bit later in Fire and Blood, which we'll get to. There's a lot of references to other characters around Alys Rivers, which is very, very interesting. Oh, and then of course, Alys gets another layer of the witch treatment. Supposedly, Alys could not have any children of her own, despite apparently trying quite often. Every single child would be born stillborn. The magical implication is that she was, I guess, killing her children to stay young, or it's like a curse from the gods or something like that. I don't really know. It goes into these stories about her. However, the other side of that is that, as I said, she is the MVP, apparently, of breastfeeding. As I said, she was the wet nurse to basically every child at Harrenhal during her life. Side note, this is a way for George to perhaps infer that everyone from these two generations at Harrenhal were nursed by this magical woman. And given her connection to like dark arts and magic, I mean, this adds a bit of magical wonder to the reader about everyone who came out of the castle, including Lionel, Larys, Harwin. Were they so successful and special in their abilities, like how Lionel was not only a giant, strong fighter, but also apparently a near genius. Larys as well. Harwin, just this enormous guy. Is that how they naturally were? Or is the suggestion that maybe they were like weapons of the gods, weapons of magic, which came from being breastfed by Alys? Of course, that's not a real thing, but it's a magical world, so the rules are different, and it's definitely a suggestion that there's something strange about like the curse of Harrenhal and the Strongs, and Alys kind of feeds into that. And it goes both ways. she reflects on them and they reflect on her. So that's something to keep in mind. We got another quote here about Alys where it says, "Was she in truth a witch who lay with demons, bringing forward dead children as payment for the knowledge they gave her?" Again, the implication there is that her children were not stillborn. She essentially traded them in a devil's pact for power. Or was she a simple-minded slattern, as Eustace believes? Good question, George. We are given positive and negative examples of this phenomenon. Sometimes, yes, characters with no magical abilities, but those that stray outside their societal norms are incorrectly labeled witches as sort of a form of misogyny, especially those who use the fear created by their reputation as armor, like we see with Rohanne Weber and very likely Danelle Lawston. I don't think anyone really thinks that she skin-changed a bunch of bats who went out and grabbed children that she bathed in her blood, but she may have encouraged the story because it made her intimidating. And that's kind of what we see about Rohanne Weber. Did she actually kill her husbands? No, but she lets the Red Widow thing happen because it helps her intimidate those around her. Yeah, the Holy Grail. Best titties. Oh my god. Isabel Nomego asks about shadow babies. Oh, shadow babies are coming up. They are definitely coming up. Side note, George has a weird thing where he talks about breast milk a lot in the kind of weird places. This is like the ultimate example of it, where Alys's magical nature in the breastfeeding going onto the Strongs is like, I don't know if it's meant to be true, but it's certainly suggestive. So, yeah. But on the other side of that, we do know there are actually magical women like Melisandre who are accused of being witches, but then kind of are, who may not bathe in the blood of children, but she is a magical being who will burn children for favor of her god and power. You know, as I said, the Valyrians believe that all magic is rooted in fire and blood. Well, Melisandre's going the fire route, but there's no reason it wouldn't be the other way for blood sacrifices, and we know that followers of the old gods do that. That is a thing. So, it's not that uncertain in the universe. It seems like really over the top, but also kind of rooted in something. It kind of goes both ways. Some family business here, though, to keep track of with the Strongs, and it's the idea that Alys, despite being a bastard member of the family, does not seem to be treated super well by the rest of the Strongs. I mean, her job at the castle is to be wet nurse, not just to like members of the family, but everybody. It's not really like considered a prodigious role that she's been given. Like, there's no indication that Lionel brought her to King's Landing like he did with his sons and daughters and tried to get them marriages and tried to get them jobs. No marriages are arranged for Alys. She's left behind back at the castle. And Lionel could have. He was hand of the king. His family was on the rise. He could have made matches for her if he wanted to, or found a job for her. That's not that uncommon. She's also seemingly quite below stature of other members of House Strong, like Sir Simon Strong and his grandsons in Harrenhal. When Lionel's away, they rule. Alys has apparently no role in this. This is very much the southern idea of bastardy, where they are treated as little more than peasants, rather than kind of the northern idea of bastardy, where they can be seen as more like members of the family and given important jobs to do. Kind of a cultural thing there, but there may be a potential reason for this. For instance, there's the idea that Alys doesn't seem to be considered a member of the Strongs by the rest of the family. This could suggest that Alys is a Strong not through Lionel and the main line of the family or Simon, but perhaps from Lucamore the Lusty's bastards, which were sent back to Harrenhal and trace her line through Lucamore rather than the main line of the Strongs, which came from his brother Bywin. So after Lucamore was gelded and sent to the wall, Jaehaerys and Alysanne split up his many, many children. Some went to the wall with Lucamore, others were sent back to Harrenhal with their kin, the Strongs, others were sent to Storm's End, and more were sent to Driftmark with the Velaryons. So it's very likely that the shame of Lucamore hung over his descendants and his bastard children's compared to the true-born Strongs, creating a distinct class disparity between them. This may inform why Alys, despite being ostensibly kin to the Strongs, is treated as little more than a household servant. She's one of Lucamore's kids, not from Bywin. That would definitely create a divide in the family. That kind of thing happens all the time, and that could be the kind of thing that really grated on Alys, as it seems like she was treated less than the rest of her family. Oh, good call by Jess B. She says, I suspect the Targaryen's magical blood that had stillborn children were genetically closer to dragons or another creature than the humans they were trying to breed with. Maybe Alys is the same. Could be. It is definitely a thing in Targaryens that they have quite a lot of stillborn and twisted and dragon-like looking children, so that is another inference you can make about Alys, that a weird thing that George is suggesting with her. Alys is very clearly playing a long game, but to what end? A good question, Carl Karsnark. But going back to Lucamore and his bastards that were left behind, I would really not be surprised if that's what George is alluding to, with the fact that he mentions the bastards were sent back to live under the Strongs. That is definitely the kind of interhouse shaming that you would expect to see among the nobility of Westeros. Aid Kinley says, those tales are all about society not understanding women who wield power. After the Reigns, the singer wrote songs about time when no one accused them of sorcery to get done. Yes, that's true. As I mentioned, the calling a woman witch in Westeros and assigning these roles to her is very much a cultural thing. It's a way of showing that they are sort of stepping out of the way that the misogynistic culture expects them to be, but there are also literally witches, and so it's probably wrong like 99.9% of the time when you hear it, but we do have examples where it's like, oh, this character is a witch, she's doing crazy things with blood magic and she's killing children. It's like, well, sometimes that does happen. Unlike in our real world where it is very much 100% fail rate on that one. We do very much see other women that get the kind of same treatment. Sansa gets accused of turning into like a bat wolf thing and flying away after Joffrey's murder. Sansa's not a skin, well, she is a skin changer, but she's definitely not a shape changer, and she's not like a crazy murderous witch character, so like that is completely misplaced. And it's probably untrue about Danelle Lofton, but it's definitely true about at least Melisandre. And we know Rohane Weber it's not true about. Oh, also $5 PayPal from Danny McKay. Happy Saturday. Thanks, Danny. Appreciate it. So that's kind of the backdrop of Alys Rivers. That's where you get to what I call the Harrenhal waltz. Harrenhal, not a great place to rule. Before the dance, one very important thing that happens at Harrenhal that may involve the previously little-known Alys Rivers. As discussed in the last stream, Harwin had cuckolded Laenor Velaryon with Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, and as such, the three heirs to the Iron Throne were in fact not Velaryons, they were three Strongs. Jace, Luke, and Joffrey. The tension eventually boiled over, and King Viserys told Rhaenyra, you have to send Harwin Strong away. Harwin is sent away from Dragonstone, away from Rhaenyra, who he had at that point, I think a 7 or 8 year relationship with, and three kids. Harwin and his father, Lionel, who's Hand of the King at the time, go back to Harrenhal. Harwin's presumably probably pretty furious about what happened, but also maybe a little heartbroken. I mean, clearly he and Rhaenyra were together for quite a long time. He had to leave behind his kids, that kind of thing. And Lionel may have been accompanying him not only to be like, hey, buddy, you'll get over this. Sorry this happened. At least you're not dead, that kind of thing. But he also could have been maybe trying to avoid an immediate Viserys overreaction. He had previously threatened to rip out tongues, and he was in kind of a violent mood. So maybe Lionel was like, all right, I'm going to take a little vacation back home to the Riverlands. I'll be back. Maybe Viserys will have cooled off by then. So the two men arrive back at their seat of Harrenhal, and almost immediately a fire breaks out. The fire engulfs their quarters, killing both men, their retainers, as well as a dozen servants. Now, I went through a potential list of suspects about if this fire was lit on purpose, who did it. And the guy at the top of the list for me is Damon Targaryen. He had good reasons for wanting both men dead. He seemingly has like a weird spy network and assassins he can call on. He definitely has the personality of someone that would be totally on board with killing guys like Lionel and Harwin. So that was my best suspect. But even if Damon did do it, if he arranged the murder, or really anybody else from King's Landing, they would need somebody local, the cat's paw at Winterfell, in order to, go through with the lighting of the fire and actually kill them. Is it cuckolding if the husband agrees and is happy to recognize the kids? That's a question I don't know about. More of an open relationship, perhaps, but definitely that was the implication from the rest of them, that these kids were masquerading as Velaryons when they, in fact, were not. So yeah, perhaps it was Alys Rivers who lit the torches and barred the doors that led to the deaths of Lionel and Harwin. Alys's later ownership of the castle and seemingly lack of care about the rest of her relatives' deaths raises the possibility that she may have been pretty unhappy to be forgotten and left to live with the rest of the common folk around Harrenhal while the Strongs played the Game of Thrones and rising in power, that they just forgot about her. That would certainly be a pretty good motive, especially if they basically never treated her like family anyway. And I want to raise the possibility here that it's maybe she was bullied or maybe abused by Harwin Strong and other members of the family. Like, we know as captain of the Goldcloaks that Harwin used his immense strength, size, and name to essentially do whatever he wanted to anyone. He walked around King's Landing like he owned it. So maybe that behavior didn't start when he had a gold cloak put on him. Maybe it's something that started at home. Maybe he would make fun of Alys, or far, far more. So that could be something to keep in mind. We also know that Larys Strong is a manipulator, and he becomes a trained torturer. His father obviously recognizes that the underworld life is right for Larys, so perhaps Larys started young when they were still in Harrenhal and used to mess with the other kids. Maybe he messed with Alys, that kind of thing, and created a motive for murder from her. Certainly a possibility, but we don't really know who lit that fire or anything. But we do know that the Alys and Simon Strong are eventually the ones that benefit from it the most locally. So if you're looking for who actually lit the fire, those would be the top suspects. Whether or not they were working with anybody else, I am not really sure. Alys had a bad relationship with Damon. Sort of. I will get to that in a little bit. So the other thing to keep in mind here is that we know that Alys is supposedly a sorceress, and among her powers is the ability to see into the flame. So, like, in a more abstract sense, rather than the granular, like, what happened between them as kids or who has the motives, Lionel and Harwin died very similar to how Harren and his sons died at Harrenhal. They were burnt alive in their castle, trying to hide behind the walls from the dragons. In this case, metaphorical or real ones from Viserys and Damon. Given how tied to the dragons Alys later becomes, she may be the metaphorical Balerion that lit the fire and killed Blackhair and his son, aka Lionel and Harwin. I mean, you look at her, she has the means, she possibly has motives, and she definitely has the opportunity to do it, so I would not rule out Alys Rivers as the one that lit the proverbial fire that killed the two eldest members of House Strong. Corlys is another good possibility. He had definite reason for not liking Lionel or Harwin. I mean, there's a ton of other possibilities. I went through them in the last stream about 3/4 of the way through, if you want to check them out. So after the deaths of Harwin and Lionel, Larys Strong becomes the Lord in name of Harrenhal, a title in lands he basically never seems to use, as the governance of the castle remains with Sir Simon Strong and his grandsons. Alys remains just the wet nurse in residence of the castle, no mention of what she's doing at this time. So the full-blown civil war of the Dance of the Dragon breaks out, and as often happens, there's a rush by both sides to seize Harrenhal. This basically happens in every war, because it's at a very key strategic location at the center of the roads, the Trident, and the God's Eye Lake. Which is why Harren chose it as the location, aside from potentially magical reasons, as it's the natural center of Westeros, not King's Landing. King's Landing is mostly propped up by the fact that the Targaryens lived on Dragonstone and that it's a port, not really the geographic or the center of the place, especially after they built the roads. However, it often falls in wars really, really, really quickly because, as I discussed in my Harrenhal live stream, the castle is huge, and when it was built, it required two full kingdoms worth of incomes and manpower, plus taking quite a lot from the Stormlands to even build it, never mind properly defending it before it was melted by dragonfire. And spoiler alert, the Lords of Harrenhal after Harren were not given anywhere near that level of vassals and land to rule and to gain taxes from. The Tully family is instead given the entirety of the Riverlands. Much of the Stormlands is carved up and given to the Crown Lands by Aegon. So, meaning that no lord afterwards who was given or inherited Harrenhal can actually afford a proper defense of it. So, in practice, the castle usually falls to the first army to show up, and then it kind of trades back and forth. Natural allies sometimes show up to take it, but that's not always how it goes. In the War of the Five Kings, we know that it gets passed back and forth between Robb's and the Lannister forces quite a few times. That is a normal behavior for Harrenhal. However, the residents of Harrenhal, aka the peasants and servants of the castle, tend to more or less stay in place throughout the war. It's usually the warriors and the lords and the nobles who are displaced. We see this during Arya's time in Harrenhal, where it's largely the same servants there that are, cooking or serving the lords, that kind of thing, kind of no matter who's in charge. There's a permanent population that stays there regardless of who's there. Good question, Mercy Waters. Any chance Alys visited the Isle of Faces? Yes, very much so. Yeah, everybody's living in that haunted castle together. But yeah, there's a permanent population there, and that's what happened during the dance. The first alive at Harrenhal during the dance is the Blacks, led by the rogue prince himself, Damon, and Caraxes, who showed up dragons blazing. Unsurprisingly, Sir Simon Strong quickly surrendered, as the Lords of Harrenhal usually do, and Damon takes control. Now, Damon supposedly takes the Strongs and the castle's small folk, including Alys, hostage. Doesn't really happen. They're not really hostages at that point, because who's going to pay for them? Larys? Not really. There's nobody to hostage them out to. So they essentially just end up working under him. They stay in their positions, that kind of thing. But one thing that does actually happen is that during his time as Hand of the King, Lyonel Strong had managed to amass a small fortune in gold, which Damon promptly steals for their side. Way to go, Damon. But yeah, they are left in charge of the castle. Damon's men and Damon himself are in charge, but they're mostly just waiting around. Why they're waiting around is because the Damon and the Blacks proclaimed that the taking of Harrenhal was this amazing, great victory, which does not bode well for the residents of the area. The easy victory is used as a political tool for Rhaenyra's side, that she and Damon conquered the great fortress of Harren, which means they're awesome. Which means, again, they have put a target on Harrenhal that the Greens will want to take that back from them, not only tactically to get control of that whole area, but also to sway public opinion back their way, that Aegon II is in charge. Or Aegon II is in charge, not the stupid Damon and Rhaenyra. They haven't won anything. Who cares? We took it back. That sort of thing. So Damon takes the big W there. And that's basically where it stands. He doesn't execute anybody. He doesn't pull a Brave Companions or the Mountains Men sort of thing, where they just start killing people at random. He basically just sits there as Caraxes. Why? It's bait. But bait for what or who? Well, Aemon, One Eye, and Vhagar. By placing himself in Harrenhal and flying a win in the face of Aemon and Criston, as well as guy trying to become King Aegon, Damon ensures that the Greens are going to march on Harrenhal to defeat him and take away his glory. Much the same thing that happened to Corlys's wife, Rhaenys the Queen, who never was. They want to take out a primary dragon rider and force behind on their side with an easy victory. It's also noted during this time that Alys and Damon, despite the fact that Damon is totally cool with sleeping around, and Alys apparently has magical abilities to entrance men, no hint that the two of them hooked up during this time. Yeah, actually, Corlys Whitefire just said that Alys couldn't charm Damon. He was a true student of Old Valyria. Or he just wasn't interested. Who knows? He was really into Rhaenyra at this time. So I'm guessing if he did, it's not reported. But maybe he did. So yeah, the Greens are going to march on Harrenhal to defeat him, take away his glory, and take out Caraxes. This works out extremely poorly for the Greens as they leave King's Landing in force, led by Criston Cole and Aemon One Eye, to root out the rogue prince. Who knows this is happening? Maybe by Alys? And Damon leaves before they arrive. Some Liverlords put up a small fight around the God's Eye, but it's really just enough to bog down the Greens. Damon and his allies flee, leaving Harrenhal and the Strongs undefended. So Aemon and Criston show up. Damon's gone, his men are gone. It's basically just the Strongs and their garrison that are sitting there. They take the hollow victory. And why is it a hollow victory? Because while this is happening, Rhaenyra's forces have seized King's Landing. Aegon is forced to flee. He goes into hiding, smuggled by Larys Strong. Otto Hightower is among those executed. The Greens lose a lot of their local allies in the Crownlands, which were their primary allies, other than the Hightowers. Alicent Hightower and Helena Targaryen are taken hostage. You know, this is very, very bad for the Greens. Naturally, who's upset by this? Aemon One Eye. Aemon is very upset that his family is taken hostage. Some of them are killed. They've lost King's Landing. Aegon has essentially run away. Nobody knows where it is. So, yeah, he takes the whole execution and capture of his family and loss of King's Landing pretty hard. And decides to take it out on the local garrison at Harrenhal. Whoops. Aemon goes ahead and pulls a, not an Amory Lorch, what's his name? The guy from the Brave Companions. What's his name? Let me look this up. Vargo Holt. Yeah, he pulls basically a Vargo Holt on Harrenhal at this point. He accuses the Strongs of having informed back to King's Landing that somehow this whole march on Harrenhal left it undefended, and therefore the Blacks should double back and take out the capital. And somehow this means that Larys Strong is playing both sides, even though all of his actions are ostensibly benefiting the Greens. Aemon, quote-unquote, reasons in a Joffrey-like fashion that Rhaenyra found out that they were marching on Harrenhal because Larys informed her, and that it totally wasn't the fact that they publicly left the city with a massive army, and also Vhagar was seen flying around the Riverlands. Somehow, this is incomprehensible to Aemon, and he decides the Strongs are all in on it. So what does he do? He challenges Simon Strong, a very old man, to a trial by combat. This doesn't go well for Simon Strong. He loses. Aemon cuts him into pieces and then feeds the pieces to Vhagar, and then proceeds to do the same thing basically to everyone in the castle who is vaguely related to the Strongs. He executes them all one after another, feeds the rest of Vhagar, and then piles up their heads in a pile that's like something like 3 to 4 feet high. That is really grim and pretty much a giant overreaction from Aemon, where he is taking out his anger at the his own bad decision making on these unfortunate people that live in Harrenhal. They didn't really do anything. So yeah, it's supposed to be put up as a message, though I'm not really sure what the message was, because the Strongs didn't even oppose Aemon when he showed up. They instantly surrendered. They could have told him they're actually valuable because they'd been around Damon and his men for quite a while, but Aemon doesn't give a shit about that. He's all in on this conspiracy theory that the Strongs and Harrenhal and Larys were the ones that made this bad thing happen and not himself. But it's Aemon, so he goes full psychopath and just kills a whole bunch of people for no reason. Except one. One member of House Strong escapes the total destruction of the family, and that is Alys Rivers. We have the quote here, kind of a strange one, and it's another thing that, as I read this, keep in mind all the other weirdness about the mystery of Alys Rivers and like the stories about her. And this again, I think, just layers onto it. George is like going, hoo, get ready for this one. It goes, thus did the flower of House Strong, an ancient line of noble warriors boasting descent from the first men, come to an ignoble end in the ward at Harrenhal. No true-born Strong was spared, nor any bastard one, save, oddly, Alys Rivers. Though the wet nurse was twice his age, thrice if we put our trust in Mushroom, Prince Aemon had taken her into his bed as a prize of war soon after taking Harrenhal, seemingly preferring her to all the... I cut off the quote here, but it essentially goes on to say there was a whole bunch of maids and pretty women that were closer to his age, and Aemon went like, no, I don't want them. Alys Rivers, though, she's got something. She's got spunk. Oh yeah, thanks, Curtis. Yeah, slam the like button, y'all, if you could. I would really appreciate it. It helps out with helping people find the channel and all the fun we have here. Okay, so like, what's going on here? Why among Alys survive the destruction of House Strong? Oh, hey, Irish Alchemy, a bit late. Glad I was able to catch this one. Alys is fascinating. Yes, she is. Glad you could join us. So if we go back to maybe the class disparity between Alys and the rest of the Strongs, maybe she was very, very helpful in pointing out which dudes around the castle were actually Strongs, or which ones were related to them, which ones were bastards, and as sort of a revenge of sorts for treating her like just like a common peasant when she's actually a member of their family. That kind of thing could happen. We see, I think it's Thalia Flowers on the Shield Isles that basically does the same thing with Euron, where she takes quite a lot of delight in seeing the Trueborns tortured and assaulted and all the horrible things that happens to the rest of that family. I think it's Lord Hewitt. Yeah, Lord Hewitt and the rest of the family. Euron and Ironborn do terrible things to them, and Thalia Flowers really enjoys it in a revenge sort of way. It's like, well, they treated me like shit all my life. Now it's their turn, that kind of thing. So that could be maybe what happened here with Alys Rivers. Always bet on Mushroom side of the story. Mushroom side of the story is always the more interesting one, that's for sure. It's a fun story, the one he's telling. True or not, who knows? So that could be something that's going on there. Or it could be something a little bit more magical. Maybe she demonstrated her powers to Aemond in some traumatic way. We see a similar thing with Tyenna of the Tower, with Maegor the Cruel. We see the same thing with Melisandre, where she uses her abilities to get Stannis to not only get her into his inner circle of decision makers, but also a kind of sexual relationship, which is also what happens with Tyenna of the Tower. She uses whatever kind of magic she has. Okay, hang on a second. I'm kind of spiking my my audio here. I'm redlining. I don't want to be redlining. Okay, that looks good. Sorry about that. So it could be a similar sort of thing here. If Alys had real powers, following the example of those other kind of characters, maybe she did something. Maybe she used her prescient abilities to impress Aemond. We don't really know. What becomes, well, we have a hint later that maybe that is actually what happened. So what becomes clear early in their relationship is that this goes very quickly from woman who's trying not to be beheaded and fed to a dragon by a psychopathic dragon lord to Alys Rivers unexpectedly kind of taking charge of Aemond and, by extension, the Greens. It's a little bizarre how quickly that happens. So what follows is the full trap that's being sprung on Aemond and Criston. All the lands and villages around Harrenhal are being looted and burned, meaning the foraging parties find nothing, and those that try to go further are killed in the woods when they try to go further. The reason for this is that most of the Riverlands has sided with Rhaenyra, and so they're essentially surrounding it and fighting a guerrilla war, kind of like we see from the Brotherhood Without Banners. I'm sorry, the other possibility is that Aemond just really had a thing for Alys Rivers. You know, that, who knows, maybe he's into older women, or she's very attractive to him in some particular way. Who knows? That's a fairly low stakes possibility. He just instantly went like, she's the one for me, kind of thing does happen. So yeah, the Riverlanders are surrounding Harrenhal and Aemond and Criston. And then obviously the battle at the lakeshore, otherwise known as Fish Feed, happens, where the Greens' Westerland allies are trying to march to Harrenhal to essentially link up with them. They're ambushed at the God's Eye by the Winter Wolves, led by Roderick Dustin, who he and his forces of Riverlanders and Northmen essentially exterminate the Westerlander army. So Aemond himself is not really trapped because he has Vhagar. He can fly away whenever he wants, but his army and the forces that need to go back to take King's Landing, they are trapped. Again, it appears that Alys is showing up in his decision-making in a pretty surprising way. Supposedly, Aemond fell very quickly, deeply infatuated with her, and could not be away from her for even a single minute. Like, he had to have Alys by his side wherever he went. In the Fire and Blood, this is blamed on love potions and magics. It's kind of a bit unclear why he falls so strongly for Alys. There's another story as well that part of the reason that Criston and Aemond parted ways, Criston Cole, is that that she supposedly seduced Criston. Oh my God, scandal! How could? Oh my God, Criston Cole seduced again? First by Rhaenyra, then by Alys Rivers? My God. I don't particularly believe that one. If you want to take a neutral path between the stories of this, I imagine, given how crazy for Alys Rivers Aemond was, that he became insanely jealous of probably anyone talking to Alys. and that in his growing paranoia, which we saw with the Strongs and the conspiracy theory concocted about random bastard members of House Strong working against him, which they definitely weren't, that maybe he thought that Kristen was hitting on her, and as such invented the idea that, oh, they were sleeping together. I have to get away from Kristen because Alys can't be near him. That kind of thing. A lot of Stannis vibes. Yeah, that's right. Devoted to Mariah. I'm guessing that's what happened. Aemon essentially just went insane with jealousy of anybody interacting with her. Aemon's a bad dude, by the way, in case you can't notice. A very bad dude. So what ends up happening is Kristen tries to go south to join up the Hightower troops. Aemon kind of just loses his mind at this point. Or more precisely, it may be that Alys has started directing where her new pet dragon should go. This is probably not very dissimilar to the relationship between Stannis and Melisandre, where she begins pointing out for him tactically what he should be doing. So in the Riverlands, Kristen Cole abandons Harrenhal, striking south along... Oh, hang on, this is actually a quote. This is a quote. This is a good one. Yeah, it's true. Lord Corlys brings up that the betrothal, Aemon was betrothed to a Baratheon daughter. He breaks the betrothal for Alys. Alys actually later claims they were married. But anyway. In the Riverlands, Sir Criston Cole abandoned Harrenhal, striking south along the western shore of the God's Eye. With 3,600 men behind him, death, disease, and desertion had thinned the ranks that had ridden forth from King's Landing. Prince Aemon had already departed, flying Vhagar. The castle stood empty no more than 3 days before Lady Sabitha Frey swooped down to seize it. Inside, she only found Alys Rivers, the wet nurse and purported witch who had warmed Prince Aemon's bed during his days at Harrenhal and now claimed to be carrying his child. "I have the dragon's bastard in me," the woman said, as she stood naked in the godswood with one hand upon her swollen belly. "I can feel his fires looking at my room." So apparently what happened was he got Alys pregnant, and then he would, even though he could bear not to be away from Alys for more than a few minutes, he would fly away on Vhagar and like burn a town or a castle or something like that, and then come back. But this scene in particular, this one right here, is really where George starts ramping up the connections of Alys Rivers to magic and really the strangeness of the Weirwoods and the Old Gods. Why? Because this scene is nearly identical to one of Bran's Weirwood visions of that he saw at Winterfell. This is the quote here. "After that, the glimpses came faster and faster, till Bran was feeling lost and dizzy. He saw no more of his father, nor the girl who looked like Arya, but a woman heavy with child emerged naked and dripping from the black pool, knelt before the tree, and begged the old gods for a son who would avenge her." So, this is a good time to be reminded about the fact that Harrenhal is really close to the God's Eye and the Isle of Faces, and that Harrenhal itself is built from quite a lot of weirwoods itself. It has the largest godwood anywhere in Westeros. And the God's Eye Lake and the Isle of Faces are considered holy places for the old gods, where the green men watch over the weirwoods. So, question earlier from Isabel Lamego, did Alys Rivers go to the Isle of Faces? Based on this, I would say, yeah, maybe. George is having her imitate a very particular scene from Bran, doing almost the same things. We don't see her ask for a son to avenge her, but that does end up kind of happening. Alys Rivers has a lot of connections with the Weirwood. She has a lot of connections with the old gods, not only from like her actions and these kind of scenes, but the way she's being described, the blood magic around her, the witchness around her. Like woods witches, another term for a woods witch is basically an old god priestess. That's basically what they are. So I talked about this in my House Strong video, talking about how they're secret Starks. Well, this is one of those moments where it kind of seems like the old gods suddenly make an emergence out of nowhere in the Dance of the Dragons through Alys and through Aemond. And And again, we have Alys here playing a very similar role. She's very symbolically close to somebody like Bloodraven, a dragon strongly associated with the Weirwoods and the Old Gods. Or I'm just going to go through a list here of all the times that a Targaryen prince ended up with a kind of a woman connected to the Old Gods. So we have Jenny of Oldstones and Duncan, Prince of Dragonflies, Rhaegar and Lyanna, Missy Blackwood and Aegon the Unworthy. Hang on, I lost my place. Sarah Snow and Jace Velaryon, aka Strong, Aegon the Sixth, and Betha Blackwood. It's a repeated pattern within that from George, that a lot of these Old Gods associated women, like those from House Blackwood, those from the Starks, Jenny of Oldstones, Alys Rivers here, have a really high success rate for some reason finding themselves with Blood of the Dragon, with the Targaryens. So yeah, I think that's definitely something to keep in mind, that this is a repeated pattern and an instance where the Old Gods are making themselves known in what is ostensibly a war between the dragons. On like a large scale sense, this is how we know the Old Gods and the Children of the Forest work, where they cannot win wars by fighting them themselves, but they win them through manipulation and things like this, where they encourage wars between their enemies. Yeah, Jon and Ygritte, that's another good one. Jon himself is very similar as a child of a Targaryen and a Stark, and the Old Gods mixing with the blood of the dragon, that kind of thing. So yeah, this is another way of George essentially using these other characters as the backdrop for Alys. And actually, this language here is very reminiscent of what we saw between Dany, her dragon eggs, as well as when she was pregnant with Rhaego. And this is not the first time that George has drawn comparisons between Dany and Alys Rivers. They both had the rumors about them with using the blood of children and virgins to empower themselves and keep themselves young. They're both associated with dark sorcery. This weirdness of the feeling of the fire of the dragon coming through with pregnancy, those are kind of on the nose. So it's a little weird here. In a way, you could call Alys the Bride of Fire, as she is ostensibly married to Aemon One-Eye. So yeah, there's a lot of very intriguing connections that George is making here between this kind of random woman from Harrenhal, a bastard of House Strong, and these giant characters within the rest of the story. I really like the Dany one. That one, I was thinking about that last night, and it just kind of hit me. I was like, wow, they actually are kind of similar, aren't they? And you go back and you read the chapters when she's pregnant or when the eggs are starting to hatch. Like, some of the things Alys said sounds a lot like Dany. So anyway, after all that cool stuff, Alys is captured briefly by the Freys, which seemingly drives Aemond into an insane fury. Rather than going back to King's Landing, rather than going with Criston Cole, he engages essentially in large-scale blitzkrieg attacks on Vhagar all over the Riverlands. One after another, he shows up and burns down castles and towns until finally he recovers Alys from Sabbatha Frey. Now, at this point, it appears that that Alys takes full control of Aemond, and his decision-making and directing him what to do, much in the same way that Davos uses against Stannis when he's arguing about the Blackwater. It's like, well, it won't be your victory, it'll be Melisandre's. The same kind of thing is happening here. So the attacks continue after she is recovered by Aemon all over the Riverlands. No one's able to stop Vhagar. And this seems much more strategic, but not for helping the Greens, because it's specifically trying to draw dragons out from King's Landing to meet Aemond. Because the way he's attacking, you can't stop him unless you're another dragon rider. And there are only so many dragons that are big enough to stop Vhagar. One of them is Caraxes, of course. And this finally culminates that Damon goes back to Harrenhal and seizes it from the skeleton crew that he left behind, and he essentially waits there for Aemond alone. There's a story about how he slashed the weirwoods with his sword, and every spring the trees bleed anew. Again, the idea of the weirwoods and the dragons and all that stuff is very, very strong throughout this entire section of Fire and Blood. I'm just going to read what happens here from Fire and Blood because I think it's a really good passage and very well written. But it's also very, very revealing. We learn how Alys has taken control of Aemond, and this is crucial. He had not come alone. Alys Rivers flew with him, her long hair streaming black behind her, her belly swollen with child. Prince Aemond circled twice about the towers of Harrenhal, then brought Vhagar down in the outer ward, Caraxes 100 yards away. Hang on a second. 100 yards away. The dragons glared balefully at each other, and Caraxes spread his wings and hissed, flames dancing across his teeth. The prince helped his woman down from Vhagar's back, then turned to face his uncle. Uncle, I hear you have been seeking us. Only you, Damon replied. Who told you where to find me? My lady, Aemon answered. She saw you in a storm cloud, in a mountain pool at dusk, in the fire we lit to cook our suppers. She sees much and more, my Alys. You were a fool to come alone. Were I not alone, you would not have come, said Damon. Yet here you are, and here I am. You have lived too long, Nuncle. On that much we agree, Damon replied. Then the old prince bade Caraxes bend his neck and climb stiffly onto his back, whilst the young prince kissed his woman and vaulted lightly onto Vhagar, taking care to fasten the 4 short chains between his belt and saddle. Damon left his own chains dangling. Caraxes hissed again, filling the air with fire, and Vhagar answered with a roar. As one, the 2 dragons leapt into the air. Prince Damon took Caraxes up swiftly, lashing him with a steel-tipped whip until they disappeared into a bank of clouds. Vhagar, older and much the larger, was also slower, made ponderous by her very size, and ascended more gradually, in ever-widening circles that took her and her rider out over the waters of the God's Eye. The hour was late, and the sun was close to setting, and the lake was calm, its surface gleaming like a sheet of beaten copper. Up and up she soared, searching for Caraxes, as Alys Rivers watched from atop King's Pyre Tower in Harrenhal below. So, so it turns out that Alys has some real powers here beyond the first named thing she can do, beyond her apparently amazing milk production and the fact that she seems a lot younger than her true age. She can see the future, apparently. The In the Fire reference reminds us of course, flame readings, which we know from Melisandre and other followers of her lore engage in to great success and is a real thing you can do in this universe. The seeing in the storm clouds and the mountain pools makes us think of the Ghost of Highheart, Bran, Bloodraven, as these kind of symbolic images are very common to those that have green sight and green dreams. Oh, hey, Mallory, how's it going? I'm glad you could join us. This account must have come from Alys herself. Who did she tell this to? Good question. There's a lot of things in Fire and Blood where it's like, wait, how could they have possibly learned this? I don't know. So George previously, throughout his discussion of Alys Rivers, has made us think with his multiple sources game that maybe Alys has no powers, and Aemon is essentially just simping for Alys for personal reasons, or that he's under the spell of some kind of love potion or something like that. But no, here we have definitive answers that perhaps she does have powers, and which ones, which leads to an interesting question. If Alys knows the future and can see it in much the way that Melisandre or the Green Dreamers can, did she know that the duel with Damon and Aemon was coming at Harrenhal and that they would both die? Because presumably she would know the outcome and led Aemon there anyway. A very curious set of decisions if she actually can see the future. Maybe it was uncertain, and for some reason she thought that Aemon would survive. There's definitely suggestions that Damon survived, and that he essentially crawled away from the water or something like that. Maybe she mistook in her visions Damon for Aemond as their base. Actually, that's one of the fun things. The letters of their names are exactly the same. But yeah, it raises a lot of questions. If Alys does have these powers, what was she using them for? What was she leading Aemon towards? Presumably his own death. And like, why would she do that? Curious. Very interesting questions. This begs further questions about, like, was Aemon just a tool for Alys? Much one for the old gods, or I guess maybe R'hllor if she's using flame readings. And if so, what for? Like, we know Melisandre essentially uses Stannis as a tool to fight the darkness. If it's that kind of relationship, then what is Alys using Aemon for? What do the old gods want with Alys Rivers and the dragon in her belly? Or is it just about killing the both of them? It's I think it asks a lot of really interesting questions about her, things that we may learn in Fire and Blood 2, but also good questions about characters like Melisandre and Hyenna of the Tower and those sorts of characters. When you have this magic, and if you really have it, then what is it leading you towards? And also, do you have any real control over it? Like, the Ghost of Highheart seems to have no control over her dreams. She just reports what she sees, and sometimes they come true. It's one of those things that makes me want to see a lot more from Alys Rivers in Fire and Blood 2, because these are great questions and great plot lines to possibly lead her down. Of course, that assumes that Aemon is telling the truth here, but we'll get back to that later. So then we get the Witch Queen of Harrenhal. After the battle over the God's Eye, Alys slips out of sight from her spot atop the King's Pyre Tower, and then she reappears, but again at Harrenhal. There's been rumors afterwards, after the battle over the God's Eye, that some kind of Witch Queen has taken up residence at the castle. This is not unlike what we hear about Lady Stoneheart and Beric Dondarrion, that there's some kind of like shadowy force controlling something in the Riverlands from this like uncertain leader, guerrilla warfare kind of thing. It turns out that it is Alys Rivers herself, and this time she has captured the castle, but is no longer alone standing in front of the Weirwoods, naked with a child. Instead, she has somehow gathered 600 followers within the cursed castle and is acting as their leader, 200 of them fighting men and soldiers. And they have barred the castle door. And more than that, Alys has given birth to a dragon. Okay, this is the thing she previously could not do, according to the story, that all of her children before were stillborn, but this one works. If you're looking for comparisons to Dany, this is another good one, because Dany believes that she cannot get pregnant or have children anymore after Mirri Maz Duur's curse. And the same sort of thing here with Alys, where supposedly she could not have children, and then something weird and magical happens, and all of a sudden she can. That she like has all these interactions with the old gods, the weirwoods. Maybe she asks them for a child, that kind of thing, and all of a sudden, ta-da! She's pregnant, and she had a child. So more Alys Dany connections. And here's the quote. I find this one really interesting. This is kind of classic George, like Night Flyers sort of action. Really love this one. When Sir Regis demanded to speak to their lord, a woman emerged to treat with him with a child beside her. The Witch Queen of Harrenhal proved to be none other than Alys Rivers, the base-born wet nurse who had been a prisoner and then paramour of Prince Aemon Targaryen, and now claimed to be his widow. The boy was Aemon's, she told the knight. His bastard, said Sir Regis. His true-born son and heir, Alys Rivers spat back, and the rightful king of Westeros. She commanded the knight to kneel before your king. Alys, you are on a roll here. And swear him his sword. Sir Regis laughed at this, saying, I do not kneel to bastards, much less the base-born whelp of a kinslayer and a milk cow. What happened next remains a matter of some dispute. Some say that Alys merely raised a hand, and then Sir Regis began to scream and clutch his head until his skull burst apart, splaying blood and brains. Ooh. What? What's going on here? Others insist that the widow's gesture was a signal, at which the crossbowmen on the battlements let fly a bolt that took Sir Regis through the eye. Mushroom, who was hundreds of leagues away, has suggested that perhaps one of the men on the walls was skilled in the use of a sling. Soft lead balls, when slung with sufficient force, has been known to cause this sort of explosive effect that Grove's men saw and attributed to sorcery. Before I discuss it, actually, there's a new thing we can do here. We can create polls. How did Sir Regis die? Hang on a second. Brain explosion. Arrow in the eye. Or sling. Sling of lead. Let me put that one up there. I hope this showed up for you guys. This is a new thing that YouTube rolled out, where apparently I can create live polls for you to answer. Oh, there it goes. Brain explosion currently leading. Oh yeah, slam that like button. If we get another 30 likes, put on some silly hats for the rest of the stream. My silly hats are great. She mountained him. Wow. It showed up? Alright, cool. Oh no, nobody's believing the arrow in the eye. Interesting, interesting. What color are Alys's eyes? Based on the Strongs, it's probably brown. A Targaryen or a dragon, says Mallory. A good question. That comes up very shortly, about what exactly was birthed within Harrenhal. It blew his mind. Oh, good one, Grateful Greens. Perfect. A perfect pun. Seems brain explosion is the showed up on the app. Oh, cool. This is a new feature, so we're trying it out here for the first time. I used to use like straw poll and stuff like that, but this seems way better. Especially if it just shows up natively in the app. I don't have to ask people to go anywhere. Magic is fun. This is true. Everyone likes a good deal of magic, especially George R. R. Martin. So let's get into a discussion of like what actually happened here. So this is George asking another question about if Alys truly has any magical powers. The arrows and slings here are fairly reasonable suggestions, rather than that she can somehow just go like go like full Jean Grey and like make somebody's head explode. And that's not a thing we've seen any magic users that are capable of doing within A Song of Ice and Fire. Team Brain Explosion, by the way, Mallory, would be a great shirt. However, if you haven't read any of George's works, other than A Song of Ice and Fire, you may be surprised to know that brain explosion is a thing he has written about before. This happens in Night Flyers, among other ones, where, yes, one character is able to use magical powers, basically, to make a head explode. And basically exactly like this. And Shadow Assassins, the kind that Melisandre used, there's a lot of linking here to Melisandre. You'll see. Yeah, scanners that happens in. Good call. Yeah, but Shadow Assassins, like the ones Melisandre uses, are definitely a thing that can cut through steel. And apparently they can pick up guys like Courtney Penrose and throw them off battlements. So, like, is it impossible that a Shadowbinder could use her powers to make somebody's head explode? No, I think it's very much in the realm of possibility. If they somehow can create shadow swords that go straight through armor and throw a guy, then I assume they can go and make a head explode if they wanted to. Brain explosions are one of George's favorite things to write about, so yeah, I don't think this is as unreasonable as it sounds. In a way, you can kind of see George offering the two really reasonable ones to lead you away from the magical brain explosion. But he does like magical brain explosions, so that's all I'm saying. 43% believe the brain explosion. So again here, we have Alys that continuing to look like an actual magic user. In the aftermath of Sir Regis' death, the 200 Witch Queen's men fly out of the castle and kill all but 43 of the men there to take back Harrenhal. 32 escaped, 13 were taken prisoner. And this seems to be kind of on purpose by Alys, who holds by the pirate maxim that dead men tell no tales, which is also a thing that Euron uses, which is can't get a reputation and get people to be scared of you if they've never heard of you. So if you kill everybody, there's nobody left to go back and say, by the way, that person killed everybody but me. You have to let at least some people go. Here's the quote here. These are really good quotes, so I'm just reading them. Having been captured with a dozen others, he had been forced to watch them die by torture, one by one, before being turned loose to deliver a message. I'm to tell you what she said, he gasped, but you can't laugh. The widow put a curse on me. Any man of you laughs, I die. When Sir Damon assured him that nobody was going to laugh at him, the messenger said, Don't come again unless you mean to bend your knees, she said. Any man who comes near her walls will die. There's power in them stones, and the widow's woken it. Seven save us all. She has a dragon. I seen it. I seen it. The name of the messenger is lost to us, along with the name of the man who laughed, but someone did, one of Lord Derry's men. The messenger looked at him, stricken, then clutched at his throat and began to wheeze. Unable to draw breath, he was dead in moments. Supposedly, imprints of a woman's fingers could be seen upon his skin, as if she had been in the room, choking him. Okay, so this could just be exaggeration again. This could be nothing. I mean, this kind of thing. For instance, we know that Robb Stark is rumored to have turned into a giant wolf and eaten people. Doesn't mean it happened. But again, this is something a Shadowbinder could probably do, which we as a reader know about, which these characters do not. Twice now, Alys is being hinted at perhaps imitating Melisandre in Shadowbinding, perhaps. And then also with this seeing the future in the flames, and also killing two men in impossible ways, basically without magic. As well as her relationship to Aemon, which seems very similar to Stannis. So yeah, this raises even further questions. There's a lot of questions being raised here about Alys's identity and her age. Let's just say, as a hang on, I'm going to end this poll. Brain Explosion won 45%. Bless you all for believing in Team Brain Explosion. Let's just say, as a thought exercise, you take all of these as true, right? Everything said about Alys is true. You have somebody who has green dreams. You have somebody who's a R'hlloric fire seer, a shadow binder, maybe wearing a glamour, and more. If these are all true, either Alys is gifted beyond anyone else in the story in terms of like a magical convergence around her, or she's somebody in disguise that is using a glamour pretending to be a nobody from the Riverlands. You know, a person that kind of straddles the lines between all of these known kinds of magic in A Song of Ice and Fire and can use all of them rather than just one or two. The only thing we don't really see her do is skin changing, but who knows? Maybe she can skin change too. Maybe we'll see that in Fire and Blood Part 2. Of course, the other side of that is, maybe there's nothing there. And there's a lot of confusion around her intentionally from George that feels extremely similar to the kind of things we see from Lady Stoneheart and Beric Dondarrion. The way there's kind of these wild tales told about her, stories of impossible deeds, the connections to witchcraft and magic. The way she somehow amasses a random group of followers kind of out of thin air in the aftermath of a brutal war in the Riverlands. So, like, what is the truth here? What is the truth of Alys Rivers? Why don't we see shadow binding from Quaithe? I don't know. Maybe she's holding back for some reason. This feels a very similar question to one that is very common in the fandom, and that is in character construction to Euron Greyjoy, the Crow's Eye, which the similarities here in terms of what's real and what's fake may not be that off base, considering Alys takes Harrenhal as her home, as her castle basically becomes the Witch Queen, and of course Harrenhal was built by the Ironborn, Harrenhal from the Iron Islands. So, don't discount what we're hearing. I mean, there's a lot of similarities here. In particular, like the Riverlands has just been destroyed, just like in the War of the Five Kings. But the question becomes, like, how much of this is effective marketing, basically? Like Rohanne Weber and Euron are masters of this, using rumors about them to their advantage. But then also, how much is perhaps real magical powers that are being exaggerated? We know that Melisandre does this. She lets people think that she has more magic than she really does, like her use of powders and weird shit like that, where she does have some abilities, but she doesn't have all of them. And that's she kind of plays that up. I think viewing Alys in the same way as Euron is kind of a very fun thing to do. And there's also this kind of idea with her name, the Witch Queen, which is certainly very suggestive of another character cloaked in mystery, but not from A Song of Ice and Fire, Lord of the Rings, the Witch King of Angmar. In Lord of the Rings, Sauron's chief ringwraith and servant is this character whose one of his names is the Witch King of Angmar. He was once a mortal man who was gifted with this magical ring, which over time empowered him to an extremely powerful weapon of evil and magic, but as well as losing his identity and rendering him functionally immortal. He is so old in his undeath and his appearance literally gone from the physical world that nobody knows who he is. The Witch King of Angmar is a false name he takes up, where he kind of arrives out of nowhere to carve out this kingdom that he calls Angmar from the realm of Arnor from the dwarves. Then, acting as kind of a similar sorcerer lord here, the Witch King begins gathering forces to fight for Sauron's goal, but never actually declaring his identity as a ringwraith and that he serves Sauron, who most believe is gone forever. It is not until later in Sauron's return in his unmasking at Dol Guldur that anyone actually realizes that the Witch King was actually Sauron's chief ring wraith in disguise. So with with this naming convention that George obviously would be aware of, he's a huge fan of Lord of the Rings, that asks a lot of questions about Alys Rivers. So, for instance, like the Witch King of Angmar, is Alys Rivers a false name? Is she some kind of powerful magical servant of some power in the world pretending to be someone else? Much in the way Melisandre wears her glamour, but perhaps not just because to hide her appearance, but to be somebody else, almost like the Faceless Men in a way. If her magical powers are true, then we're kind of left with the conclusion that she's either the most powerful magical character in the world by the luck of genetics, or this is some kind of false identity for somebody much more powerful. I'm not sure. I think that's up to personal choice, basically, which one you prefer. Like, if she's like a agent of some giant magical power, then like, which one? I don't even know. Like, and what is she doing this for? It may just be luck. But of course, that assumes that her magic powers are true. Maybe they aren't. Like, arrow through an eye seems reasonable. I don't really know what's going on with the choking around the neck, but that could just be a random story. Maybe she has nothing. But if she does, this is a wild one. The Witch Queen of Narnia. I forgot about that one. That could also be on the table. 25 PLN from the Kraken Queen. No question. Just thank you for the great content. Hashtag Team Brain Explosion. I like it. Hashtag Team Brain Explosion. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Curtis Franks asked the question, who else would she truly be? That's kind of the problem. There's not any like larger magical character that's missing who like went missing like 100 years before and is suddenly reappearing as Alys Rivers. Like, there's a lot of things you would have to do, but to name the Witch Queen and the seeming weirdness of her connection with the Witch King of Angmar, it definitely, George is asking you as the reader to ask these questions. He wants you to wonder about it. And that's fun in itself. Blame it on Bloodraven. Oh my god. Nymeria, Nan for short. I've got Dying of the Light free with Audible, but I haven't listened to it yet, and I'm dying to dive into it after this stream. Rhaegar Tormund, what I am waiting for. Yeah, that's also on Patreon. You guys, I'm doing a read through of Dying of the Light, one of George's older works. I don't know if brain explosions are in that one, but from what I understand, there's some really cool stuff coming up in the chapters. So that's patreon.com/JoeMagician if you want to check that out. Chapter 2 is free, and it's with me and Aziz. $5 from Sanrixian. Hashtag Team Brain Explosion. Thanks, Mallory. Yeah, it's worth thinking about. The truth may be more mundane, but this is a good kind of George's question. Is Euron, it's the same as Euron. Is Euron the Eldritch Apocalypse? Is he magical? Is he bringing about the end of the world? Or is he just a pirate who's really good at marketing and propaganda? Or is it somewhere in between? If you like that question, you should like Alys Rivers quite a lot. Ooh, that was a bad one. Hang on a second. Let me take a drink. So we do not know what happens to Alys and her child. There's a child here, by the way. Her child by supposedly Aemon One Eye. Why? Because winter falls and winter fever shows up. There's no mention of them in the World of Ice and Fire or the Maiden books or Dunk and Egg. So basically, if you want to learn more about Alys Rivers, we're waiting for Fire and Blood Volume 2, whenever that arrives. I think the last time I saw it, George said it was going to come out after A Dream of Spring, but he has to finish The Winds of Winter first, so who knows? We may never get there. This may be a really good opportunity for fan fiction. And Chloe asks, if it's true that Melisandre is hundreds of years old, could it be that Alys is her first appearance? Possibly. Although, I think that Melisandre, her real name is Melanie, so... But we don't know. Maybe Alys is in between another identity. That'd be kind of fun. So there's kind of a blank spot here. Harrenhal is not actually gifted to House Lothston until 151 AC, whereas the winter fever outbreak occurred in 133 AC. So that's a long time for Alys to be possibly in control of Harrenhal, making moves, and for George to possibly write about her. Essentially what happened is winter fell, like literally snows fell, and then of course winter fever broke out and killed a whole bunch of people. So Unwin Peake and his band of merry men back in King's Landing said, like, all right, we don't need Harrenhal that bad. Everyone's dying anyway. There's a pandemic going on. We're not going out there. So they leave Alys in control of Harrenhal with her 600 people. That's kind of where it leaves off. So let's get to the question. Where did Alys Rivers go? Anne just speculated that perhaps this is Melisandre in an early form, her pretending to be Alys Rivers for some reason. Certainly a possibility. There's quite a lot of connections between the characters, behavior, the mystery around them, possible magic seems to line up. That's not out of the realm of possibility. I would say probably unlikely. I would be surprised if Melisandre was actually Alys Rivers, but you know, there's enough reason for long-lived characters to like her to think like maybe there's a connection there. Clint of the Learned Hands podcast, he said she's definitely the ghost of Highheart. This is another very popular one that in her old age and her agelessness and whatever else is going on with the magical Alys Rivers, that she became the character we know of the ghost of Highheart, or the Woods Witch that came to court with Jenny of Oldstones. I believe one problem there is that the ghost of Highheart and the Woods Witch that came with Jenny was a albino, and Alys is definitely not. She has dark hair, and I believe she has dark eyes. Definitely not an albino. So if she becomes the ghost of Highheart, that's quite a lot of appearance changing. But if she's able to do glamours and stuff like that, maybe she could. Or maybe she's wearing a glamour now to look like the character we know as Alys, that she actually is an albino. Who knows? But that definitely is a thing you'd have to work around to work the theory that Alys Rivers is the ghost of Highheart or the Woods Witch. There's another good possibility here. So if you guys don't remember this is a fun story from Fire and Blood. The Burn Men of the Vale, they started because a fire witch arrived in the Mountains of the Moon with a dragon and essentially took control of their clan. They have to like give sacrifices to her and to obey her. This is suggested in Fire and Blood that this may be Nettles, Damon's lover, when she escaped from Rhaenyra's wrath. But given Alys's flair for using magic suggestion on her side and using fear to get people to follow her and also amassing followers out of nowhere, I don't think it's unreasonable to think that this may be Alys Rivers, that her eventual fate is in the Mountains of the Moon with the clan of the Burn Men. Actually, Curious Franks said another one I was going to go over. Old Nan, the ever popular suggestion that Old Nan is everybody that has ever been young. There's the scene where a lot of people think that Bran saw Old Nan making out with Duncan the Tall. The time, if Alys Rivers is actually magical and extend her life, maybe she eventually does turn into old Nan. That underneath that weird bonnet and aged and shrunken, that Alys eventually found her way up to Winterfell. Especially with the vision of the woman at Winterfell with the child and standing in front of the weirwoods. Maybe that suggests that one day Alys makes her way up there. There's nothing really to that one. It's just kind of like, maybe that'd be kind of cool. It would explain why she knows so many stories and like connections to the old gods and everything. But who knows? Another possibility. This is another one that I noticed a little bit when I was thinking about what happened to Harrenhal after Alys held it, and it's maybe the suggestion that Alys Rivers didn't go anywhere. Maybe she stayed around Harrenhal. So after Alys's reign as Witch Queen, Harrenhal was taken over by House of Losten. And there's a lot of weird similarities between the descendant of House Losten, namely Mad Danelle, or just Danelle if you want to call her that, that lines up really strongly with Alys Rivers. The witchiness, the blood thing, the sacrificing, the sorcery, they seem connected somehow. So perhaps Alys didn't go anywhere, and her descendants through this child with Aemond ended up finding their way into the Losten family, which has a fun side effect. Okay, so think about this. If Alys Rivers is related to Danelle and therefore the Losten family, then there may be a daisy chain from George to go from Alys Rivers to the current Starks. Because it seems like House Went may be like a bastard or offshoot of House Losten. Because the Lostens were, their sigil was a giant bat halved with white and yellow, but then the Wents are the same yellow color with 10 bats. That seems like it could be perhaps a bastard house, or an offshoot of their house or something like that. So this is a lot of ifs. But if the Lostens became the Wents, and Alys is related to the Lostens and the Wents, then surprise, surprise, Catelyn Tully's mother was a Went, Minicia Went. That would be kind of like a really fascinating like weaving of a family tree to get you from Alys Rivers to Bran Stark and Sansa and Arya and all these characters. And if Alys Rivers is truly like the most magical person ever, if you're looking for some way for why Bran and that entire generation is so cool, maybe it's the Alys Rivers blood making it all the way down through the generations to the current timeline. Of course, that is extraordinarily tinfoil and a lot of ifs and crackpot, but it's fun. That's fun to think about. Who doesn't like some crackpot tinfoil now and then? In terms of what happened to her child, there's no mention in any of the other books about Aemon One-Eye's kid, anything about Alys, so whatever happens to them has to be relatively contained. It's not like they don't spread out into a massive plot line within the rest of A Song of Ice and Fire, at least not within the known history. If it's anything, it would have to be pretty on the down low, which lends itself to tinfoil. Rain Weber is Old Nan. There it is. Of course, anyone that could be old is Old Nan. So let's talk a little bit about the Hot D. Let's talk about House of the Dragon a little bit. So where's Alys Rivers going to show up here? I also got a couple questions that I'm going to get to afterwards that I got from Twitter. So if Alys Rivers shows up in House of the Dragon, where would it be? Well, it wouldn't be right away. It would be probably later in House of the Dragon. In terms of the dance, she doesn't make her an appearance on page. Like, she actually doesn't show up until Aemon One-Eye takes back Harrenhal from Damon. And that's well into the war. And with what we've seen from set photos and the casting and that kind of things, it seems like season 1 of House of the Dragon is going to essentially be the run up and the start of the dance itself. Especially because we know that they're casting young Alicent and young Rhaenyra, so there's going to be a lot of flashbacks here. That would mean that Alys Rivers would probably be pushed back into season 2 or 3 if they get there. But once we get to that point, once we get well into the war and Aemon and Damon flying around their dragons, she becomes a fairly major part of the story, particularly through her relationship to Aemon. But we also have interactions between her and Criston Cole. We have the seizing of Harrenhal, the battle over the God's Eye, and all these like weird lightning attacks from Aemon all over Riverlands. So she should show up quite a bit once she does appear on the page. And in a way, if you think about it, she kind of drove almost all the actions in the Riverlands after she shows up with her influence over Aemon. So in a weird way, I put the title of this like Alys is the real main character, but kind of in a way in her influence over Aemon and exactly how much she influences through him the rest of the Dance of the Dragons. She has a truly massive role. She leads the death of Damon. She leads the death of Aemon. Takes over Harrenhal, is somehow involved with like fish feed and maybe leading to the Butcher's Ball and all these kind of things. So should be a later season inclusion, but one that will show up and be there quite a lot. I wouldn't expect to see her have more of a role than Melisandre, though. But while she was with Stannis, Melisandre was a fairly regular cast member, so I would look for that. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, and I very much doubt that the showrunners of House of the Dragon were going to pass up having their own Melisandre-like character. I would guess that they're not going to pull a Dan and Dave and essentially like push the fantasy out of the story. The way that George seems to trust Ryan Condal, I would think would suggest that he's going to try and stick to that story quite a bit more, and Alys is a key part of that. So if they're going to show like the entrance of the old gods and the weirwoods and all the weird stuff that goes on in the second half of the dance, Alys will be an important part of it. If I had to guess on what they will portray her like, though, I would think maybe more like Yennefer from The Witcher. I actually thought about using Yennefer as the thumbnail for this, but I decided to use Liliana because she's a little bit less known, especially among this crowd. But yeah, Yennefer would probably be a pretty good comp for what you'd expect to see from Alys Rivers in House of the Dragon, assuming they choose to go with the magic side, but I would guess they would. I also guessed during the last episode that maybe Harwin and Lionel Strong, their death will not be off screen, that it will happen on it, that maybe they'll move Harwin's death up closer to the start of the dance. And if that happens, and if Alys had a role in that, we may see a lot more of her earlier, especially with the two of them arriving back at Harrenhal from King's Landing. I would expect that to be her to show up as a minor role there, kind of disappear for a while, and then show up later, much more in force once Aemon and Damon show back up at Harrenhal. Yeah, she serves a very important role in the escalating influence on magic and weirwoods on the dance, one that's not directly on the page, but one that's sort of in the backstory. So hopefully for that. And then obviously when she shows up, she should stick around for quite a bit. The Strongs have... Actually, this is one of the reasons I like how Strong basically just like on their own. But when you read Fire and Blood, and especially around the Dance of the Dragons, they have an outsized role on the Civil War itself from beginning to end. And Alys is an important part of that, along with Larys. These will be two characters that will be pushing the plot in not obvious ways. They're not like Damon riding their dragons or anything like that, but they do have an important role pushing pushing the plot and pushing the other main characters around. So looking forward to that. That should be really good. So I got 2 questions from Twitter. From the Conqueror's Crown. Concerning her powers as a witch, do you believe all mushrooms' claim are true, or is there a bit of exaggeration? There's no way mushrooms always right, but I would guess that George intended you to read mushroom as being over the top, but seeds of truth in a lot of what he's saying. That's sort of the point where he always goes like, "Oh, don't believe mushroom. He's crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about." But then a lot of the time, mushroom was like supposedly there for the events, and a lot of what he says seems to line up in weird ways to the other tales. So I'm gonna guess that there's more of a seed of truth to mushroom than to Eustace and Munkin. Also asked, could she be linked with the Children of the Forest and the Old Gods? Absolutely. I went over that. I think it'd be a really cool scene if Alys has some role in like Adam. I think it's Adam Velaryon that ends up going to the Isle of Faces. That'd be cool if Alys was there in some way, or if we see her go there. I guess that depends on how much they want to make the Isle of Faces and the God's Eye in Harrenhal like a permanent set piece. But so much happens there that I would guess they would want to. They could also like maybe invent a few scenes where like Alys takes Aemon to the Isle of Faces or talks about it or something like that. That'd be kind of cool. That seems to be a large part of her role. Larys Strong is Fire and Blood's Varys. Well, he's Varys and Littlefinger at the same time. Littlefinger, L, Varys, push them together, you get Larys. That one seems pretty on the nose. Do you think Alys is truly a strong bastard? I would guess that yes, that Alys actually is a member of House Strong. It adds a lot of potential meaning to maybe why she helps Aemon and why she doesn't seem to care that he just murdered the rest of her family, other than the fact that he's holding her hostage. Like, it would also help out with the fire plot if Alys has some reason that there's a dislike of her by the rest of the Strongs and vice versa based on her being a bastard, and maybe related to Lucamore. That would be my my guess. And let's see here. What are your expectations for Alys's role in Fire and Blood? We sort of talked about that already. Do you think she'll ever be defeated? I think that's a good question. So will Alys ever be taken down within the story? If I had to guess, the way she kind of slinks out of history, I would guess that nobody catches her, that she just sort of disappears into the woods, disappears into like the Isle of Faces or something like that, and nobody knows what happened to her. That would be the coolest way for that to happen. Stonefire89 says, could Dunk be related to the Strongs through her? Yeah, that is a definite possibility. I speculated last stream that maybe it's through Harwin, that Harwin may have left some bastards behind King's Landing, and that's how Dunk gets there. But there's some other possibilities of like the Lostons or the Wents. There's a weird amount of information that could get you to Dunk from the area around Harrenhal. I think Harwin is definitely the least tinfoily of them. It's like, yeah, maybe Harwin just left behind a bastard, wait a few generations, you get Dunk. That could work out. You don't need to believe anything crazy for that to happen. But the other ones are fun too. We're all related to Lucamore. That's right, Sasuke. But it is fascinating that supposedly through Aemon One Eye and Alys Rivers, there's supposedly this half-strong, half-Targaryen running around there, and we know from the other half-strongs, half-Targaryens that they can be dragon riders, so that is definitely something for George to play with, and definitely as a mirror to a character like Jon Snow. Like, maybe Alys's child with Aemond would be like Jon if he grew up knowing who his parents were, that kind of thing. rather than believing he was a Stark? What if he knows the whole time that, like Viserys, that he's a prince or that he's the son of a prince, that kind of thing? That would be kind of fascinating. Devoted to Mariah. I don't know. I know this isn't a focus, but I wonder who the Three-Eyed Crow was around this time. Good question. Probably an unnamed character, honestly. We don't know a lot about this time, about anything about the Children of the Forest are doing. But wouldn't it be kind of fun if Alys Rivers ends up being the Three-Eyed Crow? What if she ends up going beyond the wall and goes to what we know as Bloodraven's cave? That'd be kind of cool. If she's actually this magical, wouldn't that kind of work out? Lucamore the legend. Lucamore has some legendary loins, let me tell you. Actually, there's one part of that I'm going to talk about in a future thing. Amanda and I, Crowfoot's daughter, or Disputed Land. God, she has a lot of names. We talked about how perhaps the Baratheons are related to Lucamore because Lucamore's bastards got sent to Storm's End, and then all of a sudden you see the Baratheons becoming these like giant, strong like men, especially like the Laughing Storm. Well, the other place they go that we didn't really talk about is Driftmark. I'm wondering about Alan Oakenfist. He certainly seems to have a dunk-like qualities to him. Oh, 150? All right. We got there right at the end. George hat. Thanks for slamming the like button, you guys. I really do appreciate it. Alys Rivers with Three-Eyed Crow. That's the history. That's what I want for her in the future. Oh, good call. Christina says, if you're near the Owl Faces, no reason you have to go up north. Yeah, maybe there's a three-eyed raven beneath the Isle of Faces in the God's Eye. That'd be kind of cool. Yeah, Corlys. I really do think that if you want to make Alice a major character, or if you want to make her a more secondary character, I think playing up her relationship to the other the rest of House Strong and making a negative one, which is perhaps hinted at based on her status as the essentially the wet nurse of the castle, rather than being like a full member of the family. I think that's a really good way for the writers of that show to try and give her motivations for what she does. Because as we have in Fire and Blood, there are no reasons given for what she does. It is just recording the actions as they happen. I look like George? Hope not. Do we? Maybe it's that we're both overweight. Wearing glasses. Let's see here. If I was writing House of the Dragon, and call me, that is something I would do for Alys Rivers. I think that's definitely something you could. Bookish train conductor look. Yeah, George loves trains. He also likes ships, and especially on the one on Fever Dream, the riverboats. He loves those things. Beard like Germ. That's a way of saying I have a bad beard, because George has a bad beard. If Oakenfist is possibly as strong, could Marilda be one? Yes, indeed. And Adam Oakenfist, and Alan Velaryon, or Adam? No, it's Alan Oakenfist and Adam. Maybe Adam and Alan are both Strongs too. Wouldn't that be kind of a fun inversion? If the fake Velaryons, if the Velaryons are actually Strongs, and then the real Velaryons are actually Strongs too. No matter what, Corlys can't escape them. That'd be a George thing to do. Or you guys need to look up pictures of young George. Oh man, that guy. Go look on his website. There's some stuff going on there. He posts them sometimes, him in Paris. Actually, I should make that a theory. Yeah, that works in a very George way. That Corlys maybe tries to get rid of the strong bastards because he doesn't want them to be, he doesn't think they're his kin, and then he accidentally elevates actual strongs. That'd be kind of funny. George. I think I should ask him that at an event or something like that if we ever get them again. That'd be a good one. Any last ones you guys got? Throw them in the chat. We're going a little bit over again today. Also remember that right after the stream ends, chapter 3 with Aziz of History of Westeros for the Dying of the Light read-through is going to go live. Hang on, let me post the link. So if you guys are at the $5 and up level, you'll be able to listen to it. Hang on a second. Just wait till after the stream. I have to update the settings, but actually, why don't I just do it now? I'm just going to do it live on stream. I'm going to update the settings on this, and then I'll link it. So this goes out to Maesters and up. All right. There we go. So that's live for chapter 3 is now live. So if you guys are patrons, you guys can go check that out. Chapter 2 is also up. If you click the thing at Dying of the Light at the bottom, it will take you to a playlist of all of them. If you haven't listened to them or if you want to, that kind of thing. There's a whole playlist for you. What do we have coming up? Next week, maybe I'll do another member of House Strong. Maybe Lionel, Luca Moore. Those are good ones. I don't want to talk about Larys yet because he has such a huge role and I don't really understand him yet. So I'd rather do like a reread or something about that, looking at Larys to figure out like what the hell is he doing. If I up my Patreon, will I get access? Yes, you will. When you become a Maester level patron, it gives you access to all of them, including the I did some previous patron only content like with the Meat House Man. I also did one with Sand Kings, analyzing those short stories by George. So if you go to that level, you don't just get access to this, you probably get access to like 15 to 20 hours of content. So yeah, if you want to do that, I would certainly appreciate it and hope it's a good value for you all. You also get access to the patron Slack, where we've been talking about it. And what I have coming up, I'm still working on the next video. It's gonna be a divisive one, maybe. Oh yes, Mallory, you could drop your House Strong shirt. That's right. Mallory has a secret House Strong shirt on the way. So she's been telling me about it for a while, and it sounds amazing. It'll be on her web shop when it comes up, so look out for that one. So I think that's probably going to be about it for today. We got to 155 likes. Got 3 super chats. No, actually 4. I forgot about James on PayPal. I also wanted to say thanks to the new patrons who signed up. Hang on a second. Let me grab their names. I forgot to do this last time. So it was Majorana, Catherine Stamp, Tyler Dowdle, Charboy, Ayla Clayton. Thank you guys all for signing up for my Patreon. And I will see you all next week. Have a good weekend, everybody.